Good morning. I'm glad that you're here. I want to welcome you to day 2 of CORT 2023, the third annual Conference on Religious Trauma. I'm CORT founder and host Janice Selbie. I'm a registered professional counselor and a religious recovery consultant. If you weren't able to attend our opening night last night, it was fabulous, and I'm happy to tell you that yesterday's sessions are already online. We're attending this conference from all around the world, and it's important to recognize that many of us are joining from traditional territory. I'm joining you from the unceded territory of the Seal people in what is now known as Kelowna, British Columbia, Canada. Today, I offer my respect and thanks to elders, past, present, and emerging, who have been and continue to be stewards of this land. You can learn more about traditional lands around the world by visiting native-land.ca. With religion-driven tensions rising around the world, we can clearly see that every religion comes with the potential for causing trauma. During this conference, our thoughts are with those caught in the devastating religious conflicts enveloping the Middle East. Today, we have CORT speakers and attendees with loved ones in grave danger. With this in mind, I want to remind us all to exercise compassion in our communications so that everyone here feels safe. The Conference on Religious Trauma is committed to safer spaces online. This means that racism, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, or harassment of any kind, including religious proselytizing, will not be tolerated either in the sessions or in the chat. If at any time you experience such harassment or would like to make any comments regarding safer spaces at the Conference on Religious Trauma, please send a private message or email me directly at janice.selbie@gmail.com. Some of our topics this weekend may be triggering for you. Please practice self-care during CORT. If at any time you feel triggered and you need to step away, you can be assured that all sessions are recorded and you won't be missing any vital information. Thank you to our CORT 2023 sponsors, whose generous sponsorship allows me to offer student discounts and partial scholarships for those in need. Thank you, Dr. Coco Owens, Recovering from Religion, Healing Arts Here with Nina Rain, and Dr. Tamara, MC. Please visit their booths and others in our virtual exhibit hall to learn about their resources. Lastly, a note about diversity at this year's event. If you've attended my previous events, you know that diversity is important to me. I want to offer a platform to speakers from a wide variety of religious and spiritual backgrounds, as well as a wide variety of cultures and ethnicities. Unfortunately, this year's event is not as reflective of that diversity as I'd hoped due to some last-minute speaker changes. It's my aim and desire to correct this for CORT 2024. If you'd like to see your own background reflected at CORT, please send me the names of speakers and topics that you recommend. You can email me at janice.selbie@gmail.com. Now, we are starting off today with a trio of experts who will be speaking to us about a specialized approach to recovery. Leading us on this journey is psychotherapist, international speaker, author, and director of Hope Valley Counselling, Dr. Gillie Jenkinson. Dr. Jenkinson's research into what helps survivors recover from coercive religious groups and cults led her to develop an approach she has called Post-Cult Counselling, or PCC. Gillie has trained 2 cohorts to deliver PCC. And 2 of her graduates will also be sharing the session with her today. Following Dr. Jenkinson, we'll be hearing from cult and religious recovery counselor and coercive control specialist Jennifer French. And rounding out our session is psychodynamic and relational counselor Claire Alison Hams, who will also be speaking to us on Sunday. Welcome, Dr. Jenkinson. It's so nice to see you again.
Thank you so much. It's amazing to be here. So I'm going to share my screen, and share my PowerPoint, and there. Does that work? Can you see my PowerPoint okay? All right. So Janice very kindly interviewed me for the conference for her podcast, and I went into quite a lot of detail about my background in that podcast. So if you want to know any more about me after hearing me speak, you may not want to hear any more about me, but if you do, then that will tell you a bit more. Actually, Janice we were going to introduce ourselves, but Janice has very ably and kindly introduced us. So I'll carry on, and Claire and Jennifer will say a bit more about themselves. I guess I just need to add, because I did speak about this in detail, that I'm a former member of a Bible-based or Christian cult, and it was kind of evangelical charismatic in nature. It started off as being probably rather fundamentalist, but it ended up being a cult. So I'll just say that, and that's sort of a bit of my background for those who don't know me at all. So an overview of the talk is I'm going to talk about what is post-cult counselling. So the real focus of this is to present this model of working with those who've been in religiously traumatizing groups that the members might call a cult. And I call it PCC, or post-cult counselling, as Janice said. I'll talk a bit about the premise behind post-cult counselling and the phases of recovery and growth. I'll present this idea of relational psychoeducation. I'll look at some of the practicalities, the evolution of PCC, and then just talk a little bit about the benefits of diagnosing your group or relationship as a cult. And I know it's controversial. Some people hate the term, they hate the idea, but actually I want to suggest there's some real utility in using that term. Why a specialised approach, and then some feedback from my clients. So post-cult counselling is an approach to counselling former members and survivors of coercive, cultic and spiritual abuse and religious trauma. It usually consists of working through a specially designed recovery workbook and or my newly published book, Walking Free from the Trauma of Coercive, Cultic and Spiritual Abuse, a workbook for recovery and growth. And this takes place in a conversation with a therapist who is trained to deliver PCC, of which, as you know, Claire and Jennifer are two of the therapists who trained. And the main aim is to focus on and help you understand your experience and how it has affected you and the way that you think and feel now. So to really try and understand the dynamics of the group, the religion, the cult, however you name it. And then understand the impact on you. Because if you don't understand, there's a very good chance that you're actually going to blame yourself or end up blaming yourself for things that should never have happened. And post-cult counselling generally, usually, sometimes involves around 20 to 26 hours of sessions, although it can be more or less. But it is an actual sort of focused, structured piece of work. So after completing the psychoeducational phase and focusing on psychoeducation, using the recovery workbook or Walking Free, some people choose to have a period of ongoing regular therapy, either with the same therapist or another, to focus on developmental and emotional issues. And this is phase 3, and I'll come to that in a minute. So just quickly to say, who does post-cult counselling help? Well, all survivors of coercive, cultic and spiritual abuse and religious trauma and other high-demand situations. We've all worked now with people from all sorts of groups, including those that aren't religious. And we also work with first generation who joined or were recruited, second and multi-generation former members. And the model works well with all generations. And in the actual therapy, I hold in mind the similarities and the differences between these populations, because there are similarities and differences. Sort of remaining alert to the nuances of each person's story anyway, which is what we do as therapists and in any case. So I think that if we think in terms of a cult, former cult members, whether first, second or multi, have been a member of that cult. So there is some real benefit in understanding the dynamics of that situation for all of the generations. So the premise behind post-cult counselling is this idea of the phases of recovery and growth, which actually guide me as to when to work with what in terms of the therapy and as a therapist. So this is my doctoral research findings, or a part of them, but kind of became an overarching idea and became a structure for Walking Free, my book as well. That so this idea, recovery is achieved through a complex process over time. It really takes time to recover. It's not a straightforward or necessarily easy process, but it's certainly, in my opinion, and I've had to work so hard on myself. I've had years of therapy. I've had, so much support that it was a complex process over time, but it's evidence to occur over 4 phases of recovery and growth. Now, this is just like it summarizes it. That there's probably lots of other ways of looking at it, but so the 4 phases can be viewed as a frame or a guide to think about recovery and for when to do what in the counselling. And this is the key thing. So phase 1 is the actual need for the individual to really leave the situation physically. Because if you're still in the abusive situation, well, you're still being abused. And it's very hard to actually leave. It's very hard to recover if you're still in. Now, some people do start that process when they're in, but it can be tricky. It's hard the therapy doesn't go as smoothly, put it like that. And so we have to start to begin to understand and to leave psychologically in phase 1. And phase 2 is where we leave psychologically and we build an authentic identity through cognitive understanding and psychoeducation. Phase 3 is we leave psychologically and build an authentic identity through emotional healing. So this is where we focus. These phases are focuses. They're not saying you don't ever deal with emotional healing issues in phase 2, but you focus on understanding. Then in phase 3, we focus on the normal psychotherapy processes and addressing trauma, loss, suppressed feelings. There's a whole lot of conversation about feelings, developmental issues for second generation and multi-generation who haven't grown up in a free situation, and maybe pre-cult issues for those who are first generation, and vulnerabilities to having joined in the first place. And phase 4 is really important. It's recognizing our authentic identity and recovery. It's like actually, I am recovering. I am pretty well recovered. Look, I'm pretty well recovered, but sometimes I trigger off. Sometimes something from my traumatic history triggers. So, and I've kind of accepted that. And then also post-traumatic growth, the idea that I can grow sometimes because of, and I say this incredibly cautiously, and maybe mostly in spite of. And I didn't have much that I took away that was that great from or helpful from my group. But I turned things around like others here, and I trained as a therapist and I used my experience, and that's post-traumatic growth. So if you have questions, I think we're going to do the questions at the end, but please make a note. And if anything's unclear, I really love interacting and I love questions and I love people disagreeing and having a sort of some like, no, that's not how it works. That's fine. I'm learning every day. So in terms of PCC and relational psychoeducation, the psychoeducation sits in phases 1 and 2 and mainly in phase 2. And the psychoeducation is addressed in a recovery workbook or in Walking Free. And as I say, these are focusing tools to tell our story into leading to understanding. So you get a kind of worksheet with information, and with the therapist, you start to share your story and apply that information to your situation. And as Claire and Jennifer speak, I hope this will become clear. It'll become clearer. It applies to all generations. And as I said, you can apply specific issues relevant to each generation within the therapy and the dialogue. So we focus, sorry, I'm repeating myself because I want to kind of reiterate, we focus on psychoeducation phase 1 and 2 before focusing on emotional healing and psychodynamic and developmental aspects. And I want to say this to therapists and suggest that this is actually a big lack in our training, and I'm going to say a bit more about it. So we need to understand the dynamics of what we've left, or we may blame ourselves for the abuse. In phase 3, the developmental and attachment issues differ between generations, and we need to focus on and address emotional healing and trauma reactions and address the pre-cult vulnerabilities for first generation. And the International Cultic Studies Association had a series, a mental health series, and I gave a bit more of a talk about the phases if you're ever interested. So post-cult counselling is relational psychoeducation. So all the therapists here will have been taught that, the therapeutic relationship undergirds therapy. If you don't like your therapist, you're not going to stick with the therapy, basically. And we need a relationship. We need to feel safe and open with that person. And some of this language may be very UK-centred, so I apologise if it doesn't translate really, but it's the therapeutic relationship is humanistic, it's genuine and authentic, and it's person-centred. It's centred on the client. It's non-judgmental, it's boundaried, ethical and flexible, it's interactive. And I think that's a key point with this client group. The therapy needs to be interactive. Sitting silently, waiting for someone to say something can be very triggering and very scary for somebody who's been through such abusive experiences. And I think it's important that our work is supervised and monitored by another therapist experienced in this area. And in the UK, we're expected to have supervision throughout the lifetime of our work, and I have 2 supervisors, and they can be very challenging, and it's very good for me. It's important. So relational, then psychoeducation. So it's typical that survivors don't understand the coercive dynamics, don't recognize the abuse. So I didn't think what happened to me, which if you want to know, as I say, it's in the podcast, I didn't know that was abuse. And I've heard others in this network saying that it wasn't abuse, that was just what I deserved, or it's what happens. But actually it's abuse, and it needs naming as abuse. And often the therapist is the one who's having to say, do you realize that's abuse? And then, of course, we end up blaming ourselves. And we can be confluent, which is a term I use, or merged with the cultic setting and the leader, or be expected to be. So first generation are probably likely to merge. Second generation will probably grow up merged or expected to merge. And then when you're like, I don't want this, you're seen as rebellious, which, by the way, one of a lovely lady in the International Cultic Studies Association, Lorna Goldberg, says that rebellion is often a sign of the authentic identity. So it's something to really applaud, but in those settings can be very dangerous because actually you get into big trouble. So psychoeducation helps to understand the dynamics and separate our authentic identity from our cultic identity and the leader. Now, I didn't have time to talk about the cultic identity, but I think it's a really crucial piece of the jigsaw here, that when we're in that type of group, we develop an identity to fit in. We have to fit in. I call it the cultic pseudo-identity. Some people don't like that term. I've tried hard to think of another term, but I think there's something about it being, it's not that we're pseudo, but that it's not ours. It doesn't belong to us. It's an alien part. It's a part of us that we've had to introject or take in order to be a member of the group. So post-cult counselling addresses a number of issues, which I'll come back to. And when I deliver post-cult counselling, I think of the survivor as a victim. And I'm sorry if that's a horrible word for you, but I was a victim of this group. And I was a victim of psychological, spiritual, emotional, and physical and sexual abuse. And I think that, that we develop a cultic pseudo-identity and the person we must be to belong, as I said. And this needs identifying and unlayering. So we need help to challenge our radicalized religious mindset to develop or return to our authentic identity, or our real me, as one client called it. And the post-cult counselling is guided by the phases. And we remember the principle, and I find this is really important with especially second generation, that all roads lead back to the coercive cultic setting, that if a therapist is delivering therapy to someone who grew up in a cult and they refuse to in any way address the cult, then what are they doing? Because that person grew up in that culture. It's like saying you grew up in another country, but I'm not prepared to talk about it. I'm only going to look at this through the lens, for me, of the UK, and that just wouldn't be the right thing to do, in my opinion. So it works with all different types of groups. And I think that I often think of the different types of groups as a package in a thought reform or brainwashing environment, cult or abusive relationship. The wrapping may be birthday wrapping paper, Christmas wrapping paper, but the inside of the package and the actual dynamics of what's happened are often surprisingly similar. And that makes this model possible. You can work with so many different types of groups because the dynamics are so similar. Now, I don't have a clock here, so I think we started about 10 past, so I think I'm all right for time, but you might need to flag me up somehow if I'm starting to run over. But I wanted to share with you the roadmap from my book, Walking Free. And the book is based on this roadmap and this idea that, recovery is possible. And here's one way of looking at how that might happen. And you'll see down here in the left, I hope you can see the cursor, is region 1, and the person is leaving the group or the whatever, religion, whatever, with a lot of baggage. And they stop at the little hut, they pick up a map and a journal, and then it's suggested you might want to go this way. There's a little robin that accompanies them on the way. And you'll see this road goes all the way around this lake. This is Oasis Lake, just saying whenever you need to, just come off the road, come and sit at one of the jetties or get in a boat and just have some time out. But here is region 1, and that is phase 1. And then you'll see at the top here, region 2, over to the right, region 3, and then region 4. So those ideas are based on the phases, and these are milestones. So in the UK, on some of the old roads, we have stone milestones with how many miles to go. Well, here, this is milestone 1, M1. And this is a reflection here on leaving. What was it like leaving? And then facing doubts as you go into region 2, the doubts about leaving, because sometimes we leave and we think, oh, all those other people stayed and maybe it's just me. And but then we can also reflect on the doubts that we had when we were in and were leading us to leave. Then we look at diagnosing your group or relationship. Was it a cult? Was it coercive control? Was it spiritual abuse? Then we look at confluence, which is the idea of merging. How merged were you? Introjects the things that we swallow whole. We might swallow what the Bible says whole and just take it without chewing it over or thinking about it. So that's a really important conversation about introjects. Who are you? A reflection on identity, understanding trauma or traumatic stress, setting boundaries. I can't actually see the top of the screen here. And then the person goes over this little bridge and they walk down to the thought reform hills. And these are Lifton's 8 components of thought reform. And there's a little bench for each one: milieu control, mystical manipulation, demand for purity, confession, sacred science, loading the language, doctrine over person, and dispensing of existence. Then we look at other controlling dynamics, gaslighting, cognitive dissonance, and double bind. And then unmasking the cult leader. So whoever the leadership was, claiming they're, have a hotline to God or they're the most important member, we need to unmask them and humanize them. And then we come into region 3, where we can focus on the emotional healing. And in this part, there's often an encouragement maybe to find a therapist. There is throughout the journey, but here specifically, but I actually address the issue of emotions within that kind of setting. Region 4, we reflect, this is the post-traumatic growth, reflecting on sort of what we learned, what we're left with, that sort of thing. And then we can either go round this roundabout. In the UK, we have loads of roundabouts, and I've noticed in other countries, people don't have that many roundabouts. But they're quite a useful thing. So you can either go back along the path and go back and revisit anytime you want, or you might think, actually, I'm done. I want to move on. And then the moving on, milestone 15, is a chapter of lots of tips and ideas of what might be useful moving on. And then hopefully the person is walking free with just a light baggage. One person on Amazon left a lovely review just saying actually it worked for her, which was great because it only came out in May. So you just don't know really. And she said she felt like she did go around this journey and she did feel lighter. Look, we all have baggage and she's still got some baggage, but it's not dragging her down. It's not her actually, it's dragging them down. It's this person is whoever you want them to be. I identify as her, so I guess it's me. I'm projecting myself here, but it's really for anybody.
It's a beautiful book, Gillie. I love your book. I'm really enjoying going through it. And thank you for taking the time to walk us through the map as well. I think it was such a terrific idea. And if you're okay, I think we'll let Jennifer come in now, and people can keep putting questions in the chat. And also at the end of the day, we will have the Court Cafe. Some speakers will be able to attend that as well. And people can leave questions for you also in the platform, and we will try and get those to you. So thank you so much.
Janice, how long have I had?
About half an hour.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry, Janice. We didn't let you know that we gave Gillie a little more time than me.
Oh, by all means, please continue.
No, I mean, does that work though with the time we have?
Yes.
Yeah.
Please keep going.
I know this seems like the end of the story, but I had a bit more to say. So I'll thank you. And Claire and Jennifer are happy with that. Okay. So I think the others are going to cover practicalities a lot, so I'm not going to repeat that. I was going to tell you a bit about the evolution of post-cult counselling. Just that I just wanted to say that this is not, post-cult counselling has not just happened overnight. You know, there's this picture of me as a person in the cult. I actually attended Wellspring Retreat Centre in Ohio, which is now closed, twice as an intern. Down here, the snowy scene, I went to Meadow Haven in Massachusetts, and I saw their year-long program, and I stayed for a few days, and I got to meet the clients, did the same with both. I went to the cult clinic in New York and met Rachel Bernstein, who now does her podcast. And then I was very involved all along, really, with the International Cultic Studies Association, just because there was nowhere else to do any training and stuff. And then I did a PhD, and that was, I mentioned earlier, and I wrote a chapter for a book for the ICSA, I call them. And I wrote a chapter for a psychiatrist's textbook. So all these pieces sort of coming together, learning, training, my master's and my PhD, I asked people, what do you think helps former members recover? So that was this ongoing conversation. And in terms of the workbook, and so what's ended up as Walking Free and what you see of the roadmap, it actually started at Wellspring, where they gave me some sheets and they had the original idea. And then I ended up with about 32 different psychoeducational areas and a big filing cabinet full of paper way back. And then I thought, wow, why don't I put it all together in a workbook? And so it's just sort of developed. This book is actually really good. It's rather expensive, and that has to be bought through ICSA, but it's got some good chapters in it with some people who really know about cults. It's good. And then my book, and I was just going to say something very quickly, and I'll just read this about why I use the term cult and just diagnosing your group. So this quote is what I learned, was I figured out, oh, it's a cult. It was a cult. That's why my life is so excuse my French. I didn't have a diagnosis for what I was getting away from. I put cult into Google, and all this information came out, including sites. Hello? I put cult into Google and all this information came out, including sites exposing the group, including recovery needs and life issues. And I delved into that. Oh, it's just great to have. You can't get a treatment if you don't have a diagnosis. And that really spoke to me. I just thought, wow, that, really says a lot. And I just wanted to make a comment, and this will be pretty well the end, is why a specialised approach and why normal training is not enough, I don't believe. So obviously we train, and counselling can be incredibly helpful in so many ways. I've had 25 years of counselling, believe it or not. And but it doesn't necessarily address religious trauma, cultic and spiritual abuse. And many people who come to me say that the counselling was unhelpful or actually not much use. And, I got so many quotes, but the counselling is a no, it does more harm than good, is something that came over quite a lot. And, many reported that counsellors knew nothing. And that's partly why I decided to do the training. And if I could just finish on this, is feedback from clients that I've seen. Do you find the recovery workbook a helpful tool in your post-cult recovery? Yes, it gives a structure and I like seeing the ground covered. I'm glad I have it to look back on and it gives me a sense of completing a phase in my recovery. Or yes, the workbook has been fantastic, well-structured tool so far. I am looking forward to reflecting more on what we have been through so far. In our agreement, this client stated, this is what their focus or aim was, understanding how I was manipulated for so long in a cultic group and managing the difficulty of adapting to life outside. Do you feel we fulfilled these aims? I do. I feel I've been held through this first year of recovery. It has helped me to overcome difficulties as well as gain insights into how cults work. It was really important for me to feel understood, and it has helped me make sense of my experience. And what did you find most helpful? The chance to express my thoughts and feelings based on my upbringing in a way that is deeply understood. It's the first time I've taken up counselling for any length of time due to this lack of understanding. Is it what you expected? Yes, it has been all that and more, incredibly insightful into how my cult upbringing has shaped so much. Raising awareness of this has been a delightful challenge. And then I asked them, have you had, have things shifted for you? And this person said yes on lots of different areas. And that's my information. Thank you for attending. That's me done. I apologize, Claire and Jennifer, if I went over your time. I hope that's clear. There's so much more I could say. I could talk for the whole day, so I'm going to go now.
There was one question, Gillie. I just want to give it to you. Someone says, is it wise to do the workbook without a specialized therapist?
So Walking Free, the book, is designed to go through on their own, on your own. The actual, the workbook the therapist uses is not for someone to go through on their own. And the person needs to judge, and I do say this a lot through the book. I hope you notice that, Janice. You need to look after yourself, take care of yourself. If you need to find a therapist, please find a therapist. And some people have been through it and found it helpful. So you'd have to judge for yourself, but yeah.
Thank you.
I hope that's an adequate response.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Great. So, and I agree with whoever made the comment saying that the map is just lovely and beautiful. I too shared with Gillie that for me, it actually kind of harkened back to my childhood experience with British stories and images like Beatrix Potter or something like that. So I really appreciate the delicacy and beauty in the book. So I am here to share with you all a little bit about the Cult and Religious Recovery Group program that I run. And we thought that it might be interesting to just hear about this body of work by Dr. Gillie Jenkinson that is presented in this group program form. So I thought I'd begin by just talking a little bit about the program structure. We begin with an application, so anyone who's interested applies. I take a look at that. We have a 30-minute phone call, and that's really an opportunity for the individual to ask any questions at all. There are also certain things that I am curious about. And again, my curiosities are always kind of coming back to seeing how the space of the group can truly be safe for everyone that is in that particular construct. So I do pay attention to a lot of the nuances, which I'll be getting into in a moment. Also, we then do an intake form, which is a more thorough, once somebody is has that there's an agreement to be in the program, then there's an intake form, and that includes quite a lot of information just so that I have kind of a baseline of where everyone's at. So the way the program works is that I meet with the group every other week. We meet for an hour and a half, and that's live on Zoom. The program is kept at about 8 participants. We, over the course of what comes out to be, depending on the months and the weeks, maybe 7 months, our total time together live is 30 hours. And the workbook that Gillie has mentioned is provided to each participant. So we are walking through that. Just to share with you all some of the considerations around the group program. So a balance of personal sharing and moving through educational content. Perhaps that's why the program is 30 hours versus, Gillie has identified that, it could be somewhere in the 20-hour, it could be done within kind of the higher end of 20 hours. But I've created a little buffer there really to provide also the opportunity for individuals to share. And this I have found has been one of the most powerful elements to the program, probably to no surprise to you all, that it's been very dynamic. What I have found is that as we move through the educational content, we'll pause in that material. And if individuals want to share, they do. And it's been really quite impactful. The realizations and I think discoveries really that individuals have had as they also hear their colleagues share and appreciate these nuances of, similarities, differences. And often I have found there are repeated expressions of awe as we travel through about how incredible it is that this information explains such a diverse set of experiences with, of course, tactics and principles that are all the same. But it is pretty mind-blowing when you consider that, that it could be a high control political group. It could be an Eastern religious coming from an Eastern religious background. It could be fundamentalist Christianity. It could be ultra-Orthodox Judaism. It could be a New Age Twin Flames universe group. So it is really quite incredible how this body of work speaks to the dynamics across the board in these different environments. So also, I very much have considered addressing this sort of freedom for the clients to participate in a way that's comfortable for them. That's actually part of something that I addressed during our initial call, just to get an idea of how people feel about being in Zoom, being online, if they start to feel uncomfortable, if they want to go off screen. So we come up with just some established agreements around all of that, really to enable clients to kind of move and feel free in the way that they may need. For example, in this last group, during one session, one of the participants was feeling particularly antsy in her body and feeling a lot of energy happening in her body, and asked if it was okay to walk with us as we went through the material. And so she walked, and we all, joined her in the material. So just trying to allow for some flexibility. And in general, of course, I do have everybody quiet and focused. But again, just trying to accommodate for different nuances that may arise for individuals. Hierarchy. So we know that within groups of kind of high control, high demand, often there's a hierarchical structure of power. And Gillie kind of referred to this a bit, that within this kind of power dynamic structure, we also know that in a therapeutic relationship, there is kind of this inherent differentiation in the dynamic. So we talk about that and we address it. And it's very much my hope that within the group, although I may be the one that's kind of presenting this information and that's familiar with it, I very much encourage the space to feel equalized, and and I welcome people, as Gillie has referred to question me, to question the material. I also do personally, and this is kind of a personal style, I do invite the group, especially my clients around cult and religious recovery, because of this exact dynamic. I do welcome personal questions. To date, I have not received one that I'm uncomfortable answering. I do reserve that right, but thus far, my experience with that has been really positive, just because, as Gillie mentioned for herself, I too have a background. I was in a mystical Christian group for 11 years. And I often find that there are things about my own healing journey or experience within that group that might be helpful. And so I will share, but I'll also ask permission to share, so everyone's comfortable with that. Yes, so many of us were hurt in a group environment. Of course, I mean, this is, I have people that got out of my group with me who literally 11 years later, they have never joined another group of any sort. They want to just stay away from it with a 10-foot pole. That was actually my biggest concern in launching this group program. And I guess I just assume that people will kind of self-select, or they'll speak to me about that in our intake. I do address that when I speak to people on the call, just kind of seeing where they're at with that level of, potential sensitivity around just being in a group environment. Also, this idea around healing where we were hurt. So just considering, again, what the group dynamic is. Sometimes people are coming from different belief systems, and that can feel really supportive. Sometimes the belief systems are really vast and varying. And I've actually found that to work really beautifully as well, kind of from that similar standpoint that people are having these discoveries about their own personal experience by being exposed to others who experience something so similar, but from an entirely different belief system. Also, Gillie has addressed some of the differences between those born in and those joining later in life. And of course, there are some major differences in that recovery, right? I mean, when you have actually grown up in a group, so often there's really confusion about this sort of concept of authentic identity. It's like, where do you return to when it's always been a part of your world? Really, the way that the workbook addresses this, as Gillie said, I have found that it's just brilliant in this way because we're constantly talking about these differences. And so I have found that people very much, the group thus far has actually been a mix of those born in and joining later in life. I've had people come to me that want different things. So while this last group was a mix, and that was a very positive experience, I have had people come to me and say, I was somebody who was born in. I have a lot of anger toward those who joined groups, and I feel like it will be hard for me to actually listen to those voices because they are like my parent who joined the group that then related and trickled down to generationally to my personal experience. So you can understand, these are very sensitive complications. So again, those are considerations that I'm thinking about as I'm creating the group. Okay, I apologize for a little technical. You're going to see some other elements on my screen here. But I wanted to share with you all, I thought it might be interesting to provide a tiny bit of a case study, maybe not an official case study, but one participant's experience. So in the workbook, there is a section where we address assertive anger. And Gillie very much describes as she uses the terminology assertive anger instead of just anger, but it really is just anger. But assertive just kind of tips us off to this type of anger being potentially positive, that it's a boundary setting emotion and important for our safety. And Gillie also has these fabulous kind of metaphors. And these are some of my favorite, where she talks about anger as the walls of the castle and the guard at the castle door, or a ring of fire that's surrounding us that burns those who we want to keep out and warms those who we want close. So in many spiritually abusive settings, assertive anger is treated as wrong, right? It's a sin, it's rebellious, it's selfish. And so it's not encouraged, but it's actually outlawed or punished. And we very much speak about how this anger can be positive. And this is related to one of the worksheets in the book. But we talk about how anger is essential for individuation, how anger is an important stage in the grief cycle. So really actually part of the healing process in grief, that it has this sort of power behind it to potentially drive out fear, that it might alert us to a boundary invasion, a crossing of our personal space or our psychological space, that it can actually provide us with information. It can signal unmet needs, that it can even be an antidote to depression. Also that it might facilitate realness and intimacy, right? I'm sure many of you can try on like a anger flare with an intimate partner or an intimate friendship, where that experience really has the potential for explanations and reparative work that brings people closer. So I also wanted to share a that Gillie bases some of this work around anger on the work of Sue Parker Hall. And she has a fabulous quote that's quite a long one. But the last sentence of it always just moves me. I think because personally, I hadn't quite tried it on in this way. There's something about, when language just sort of fits perfectly. This is one of those sentences for me. Quote, "It is entirely constructive in nature, and we ignore it at our physical, emotional, and social peril." So I just feels powerful, the constructive element to anger. So in this body of work as well, we separate anger from rage. As we get into some of the trauma theory a little later on, we talk about and recognize rage as an unconscious defense mechanism that's linked to trauma. And it's an experience processing problem, different from anger. So we also make a distinction between, what Gillie referred to as assertive anger, or this positive anger that we've just been talking about, and then hot and cold rage, which is sort of in this trauma category. And then also we make a distinction with narcissistic anger. And we have a little Angry Bird image. PowerPoints are not my forte. Okay. There we are. So I also thought I'd share one of the quotes by Sue Parker Hall that Gillie includes about the hot and cold rage. Rage is a natural human defense mechanism, which we all employ to some degree in varying forms from time to time when we cannot, for whatever reason, process our life experience. I would like to see rage stripped of shame that surrounds it and understood as the best response a person can muster under distressing circumstances. Love that. And then here's our little birdie being supported. Gillie writes, "Rage requires transformation, an emotional process facilitated within a compassionate and humane therapeutic relationship where all feelings, sensations, thoughts, and images are welcomed in an accepting and understanding environment that is conducive to healing. So shame is likely to accompany rage, and it is important to explore this." So back to our case study. So that's sort of setting the stage for you all a little bit in the workbook material. The way that this impacted one of the participants was that this particular individual had a history of being ashamed of their anger. They began to understand their anger, which shifted their perspective to it of being informative and possibly even reactive to the environment. So really the very first time that this individual was trying on that maybe it's not their fault, that the anger is actually arising in response to something in the environment that's actually really important information. So then this individual was at work and had an inflamed kind of experience with a manager. And they were able to just acknowledge this anger, feel it rising up, a fieriness, and just stuck with the curiosity about the anger. Why was it even there? And they were actually able to respond to it in an entirely new and productive way because they could process the information that was being given to them in that moment. So we have an impact here of a new acceptance and even appreciation. So like a little step further here, appreciation of feelings and the removal of shame. And here we see both the internal world being impacted as well as something in the external environment at work. So that psychoeducation alone was impactful for this individual. And then in addition to that, I just thought that I'd mention that the worksheets that we worked through related to the rage element, we explored what triggers the rage, what appeases the rage, and then just thinking through what might be helpful in the moment. So this is a quote. I asked the group participants if they would like to contribute what their experience has been and that I would share it with you all today. This individual did request to be anonymous, but here's what they said. Working through the post-cult counseling workbook with a group has been, my little screen's funny. Here we go. Excuse me. Has been one of the best investments of time and money that I have ever made. In my specific case, one of the worst violations in my past came from a psychologist who used cult-like control techniques. So to even venture back into the realm of counseling was a huge leap of faith for me. It was utterly shocking and debilitating when I began to realize the various violations that I had experienced throughout my life that utilized these techniques. It's everywhere, and people don't even realize how this works. Working through the workbook systematically under the gentle and loving direction of Jennifer, and then being able to talk through the specifics of our group members' lived experiences has been one of the most healing things in my life. People so often express that people who get involved in cults must be stupid. We are anything but, and talking to other survivors, hearing their stories, and also being heard by them has been life-changing. There's something specifically healing about talking to others who have been through similar ordeals. It makes you feel less alone and less shameful. And the way the workbook breaks down everything in such remarkable detail helps immensely with that, because you begin to see how calculated and formulaic the whole thing really is. I highly encourage anyone who has been harmed by this sort of thing to seek out this specialized counseling or group work. Mainstream therapists, by and large, aren't even going to know what you're talking about, which can further the trauma and damage. It is very important to know that this specialized help is available anytime you need it. So that's the end of my presentation, and we can move on to Claire.
There is one question for you, Jennifer, if I could send it your way. Thanks for your input and expertise, Jennifer. I can see how this could be helpful, especially the anger piece. I noticed on your website that you note you're not a licensed psychotherapist. Is there a time when you would refer out to a licensed therapist? What's the difference between group therapy and these types of support groups? Can and should people be in both? You can answer it as briefly as you can.
I actually meant to address that because, yes, so the group is very different from a support group. The support group structure is really a therapist holding the space while individuals are sharing. So this is really different. I am trauma certified, and I work with a modality of therapy that for trauma, which is called internal family systems. And I'm not a licensed psychotherapist. So there are definitely areas. I have a very specific skill set of expertise, and there are certainly areas where I would refer out. For example, I don't work with children. That's kind of an area that I would refer out for, but I have lots of good support as well. Gillie is one of my supervisors. I consult with 3 other therapists about my work in kind of each line of specialty that I have. So I very much care about client safety, and if I feel like I'm sort of out of my realm of expertise, then I'll refer out. And I have an incredible network of people that I can refer to as well. So hopefully that answered everything.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Okay, Janice, is it all right for me to continue? Okay, so thank you for allowing me to be part of the trio today that has come to talk about PCC. Just to say, I'm one of many therapists that have trained with Gillie. I was in the second cohort along with Jennifer. We trained together. And so, you know, you're hearing from me, but you could be hearing from one of the other members of the cohorts who have experienced the training and gone on to use it in their therapeutic work. There are affiliates on Gillie's Hope Valley Counselling website page. Those of us that are willing to be known as therapists that are using this module. So if you want to see the variety of different backgrounds of people that you can work with who use this module, then you can look there and see the diversity, different countries, different backgrounds. So just to give you a little bit of my background, who am I? So I'm in the UK, and I was a former Jehovah's Witness. I was born and raised, and I really didn't leave until I was in my 30s. So it was a huge thing for me to walk away from a lifestyle that I didn't really believe I would leave until I decided I didn't want to be there anymore, and that I was being very controlled. So I'm second generation. My parents were recruited in their youth, and I was born into a family that was very, very much part of it by the time I came along. So I left the Jehovah's Witnesses and I qualified with my core training. I chose psychodynamic therapy because it looks at your family dynamics, it looks at your unconscious processes, your patterns of behaviour, and I wanted to do that as a foundation. But when I qualified and went on to do my undergraduate degree, I realised that actually I could do some research if I wanted to about the experience of recovery from being in high control environments. And so I did this literature review as part of my undergraduate degree that showed me that actually there wasn't enough out there about how therapists are working with people like me, people like us that need support to understand our experience. In my journey of recovery, I come across Gillie. Gillie and I had spoken at some point. I became very involved in the former Jehovah's Witness community that exists in the UK. And Gillie had talked to me about her experience of working with people that had been in high control. And so when I heard about the course, I wanted to be part of that. I had to wait a little bit longer. I wasn't quite ready for the first cohort, and I'm really glad I did more therapeutic work. And then I came back to Gillie in the second cohort, got through my interview, and we did the training. And so I realised, this was really important for me to add into my core training. I wanted to work with clients. In fact, I did in the early days of qualifying work with some former Jehovah's Witnesses, but I realised I didn't have enough of the skills to offer them something, that was a whole experience of understanding their journey out of high control. So I have now been using PCC with my former member clients, and I find it a very rich resource. Try saying that when you've had lots of English toffee. Rich resource. It really is a rich resource, and a large percentage now of my clinical work is with former members. So I have quite a lot of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses because my experience is out there in the ex-community. People know me, but I've also had the privilege of now working with people from different backgrounds, religious and non-religious, and I found that incredibly insightful and rewarding for my own growth as a therapist to work with people from all sorts of high control experiences and backgrounds. I started a small group on Facebook, and that's where I connected with Janice, and that's why I'm here at CORT today. it's the peer professional group. So if anyone wants to reach out to me and ask to become part of that, it really was because I just wanted to know who was out there doing this work. And it's been able to bring a number of us together to think about what we can do collaboratively to understand more. And I'm actually doing some doctoral research now. I'm using my own lived experience to build on understanding former Jehovah's Witnesses who were born in, raised in, left as adults, and had therapy. And what was that experience? Was it good? Was it not good? And the therapists that work with them, what did they find? How did they struggle to find resources to work with their clients? Really, because we need to have more understanding. And so we have PCC, but we can always learn more. As Gillie said, we're learning all the time as therapists. So I did my training in post-cult counselling with Hope Valley Counselling, and Dr. Gillie Jenkinson had a co-facilitator, Vicky Callis, who is in the UK and is very experienced. So that was lovely to have both of them teaching and supporting us. And I really liked the fact that it was spread over a few months. We did a 1-week intensive as if we were the client. So we have done the workbook as if we were a client. And that was incredibly powerful for me because I did go in thinking, I think I've done a lot of work. I've been in therapy for years, doing my training. What am I going to get out of this? I'm being honest. And then at the end of it, it's just, I'd learned so much from those that 1 week, that 5 days that we did with doing the workbook with Gillie. Took time out, didn't work. Just we were doing full days, and in the evening, lots of self-care. And then we did 2 long weekends, 1 weekend to think about working with clients, and then another weekend to consolidate all of that and also think about how we could run groups or use this in a wider context. So it was really thorough, it was intensive, and we bonded as a group. We really shared our experiences, all very diverse backgrounds and around the world. It was quite amazing because we had group members from Australia, from America, from the UK, Northern Ireland, all joining at their different time zones because we wanted to be part of this training. So I integrated my own lived experience into the context of PCC. So Gillie's really, and Jennifer have really given you examples of the psychoeducational aspects of working with PCC, the workbook model. And coming from a high control environment where we studied a lot, we were very studious. We would have the Watchtower study on a Sunday that we had to prepare for. I was slightly worried about a workbook that we were working with. What was this going to be like? Or was I going to be told how to think and feel? But actually, what Gillie has done is through her research, her doctoral research, and her vast amount of experience, it's pulled together all the things that are out there, the theories and the research, the understandings of other clinicians, of other researchers, and put it into a working model that helps us to see, yes, this is not talking about my particular group, organisation, experience, but it's actually able to help me understand how I was controlled. It's able to help me make sense of the mechanism, but also the effects it had on me. And so Jennifer's sharing of the pieces that we go through around the importance of having healthy anger, a healthy sense of boundaries, understanding narcissism, understanding how leadership controls and manipulates. They're all so vital in building up this full understanding in the phase 2 after we've physically left part of our recovery, before we go on to do the emotional work. It allows clients having a sense of what we've done in the session. I found when I went to my talking therapy sessions, I would often pour out my heart about what had been happening, and I come away from the session and not really remember what I discussed or even the insightful comments the therapist may have given me. They were lost in this fog of my emotion. And so I find that with the workbook structure, we know that we did that particular worksheet last week, and the client can go back over that. They may have written notes while we do the session, and they can really hold on to their progress. Gillie says in the workbook, date your notes that you do accompanying the workbook, because you can look back and see, oh yes, that's how I was feeling or thinking at that particular point in the therapeutic work. But actually, I've really shifted, or I've really been able to make sense of that. So it's really important to have that framework, I feel, to be able to track your progress and see how you grow over time. The model is very flexible. So personally, I choose to work either weekly or fortnightly with my clients. Most people in the UK are used to a weekly therapeutic model. We're increasingly moving towards flexibility and maybe a twice a month model. So it's not unfamiliar for people to want to work that way. But I do say that if we do fortnightly, it needs to be longer than a 60-minute session, because when we're looking at the workbook and we're reading, we're thinking, we're discussing, time passes very quickly. So having that little bit extra just allows us to work more thoroughly, and then they can go away and process over the 2 weeks what we've done in the session. Other clients really feel that they are going through a very, very difficult time after leaving. They want the holding, containing of a weekly session, and that's absolutely fine. So we discussed that. I do a 30-minute intro call for free, like Jennifer mentioned that she does before her group process, really for me to check in with the client. Am I the right therapist for them? And also, what is it they're going to be bringing as much as they want to share with me, and how do we want to work in terms of frequency? So it can be used intensively. I understand Gillie created the model as a time away, where you could go and stay somewhere in the beautiful area that she lives in the UK, in the Peak District. It could still be used in that way. Personally, I haven't had the circumstances to offer that yet, but, there's the option to do that if that's something as a therapist you want to do. But what I have been able to do is co-facilitate a pilot 6-session therapy support group using all of the key areas from the work, some of them from the workbook, over 6 sessions for the ex-JW community. And that was really received well. We had a good experience of that. And I would like to run more if we can find time and resources to be able to make that possible. I also was able to run a workshop using the workbook model, picking out key aspects with another former Jehovah's Witness therapist in the UK for a charity called Face to Faceless, which is part of Humanists UK, and they support people that have left high control. The beauty of it is that we can work online or face to face. I have a therapy room in the south of London. I could also see clients in London. I have access to a room. But if they can't get to either of those locations, then we agree to work online. And I've got clients that are based in other countries. I think the pandemic gave us the opportunity to be able to work a bit more internationally, and PCC translates really well into that. We just have the caveat that the laws of therapy that the client will be working with are the UK laws, because that's where we're trained and qualified. So obviously make sure that that's understood. Because if we're working, for example, with somebody in America, we change differently in the UK. So I think it was mentioned by Gillie, by Jennifer, that this resource, the workbook PCC, it is suitable for post-cult spiritual abuse and religious trauma difficulties recovery. They may be very, very slightly nuanced, different aspects of how people have been affected, but the workbook is designed to be flexible in helping people understand whatever experience they've had, religious or non-religious or spiritual. So we mentioned about the difference between those that have been recruited as adults and left as adults into high control, or like myself, who were born in and who didn't have an identity before. So it's about being either fault reformed if you're recruited, or fault formed if you're born in, your thoughts are formed from birth. You're like a little sponge. And we understand the difference between that when we do the work. We really unpick the identity that we had created, whether we were recruited in or whether we were born in, and the effects that that's had on us. And as Gillie mentioned, it's about the unlayering, the understanding of the introducts, which we call the introducted pieces that the high control have put into our system, jammed it all up, and then we help clients start to identify. And I think somebody mentioned in the comments about whether we can work alone, and Gillie's provided the book that's published by Routledge in the UK here for self-reading. Been Linden, don't know how I did that. The beauty of being with a therapist is that we can help you to see blind spots. which we often can't see on our own. Often when we're thinking about our own experience, we can miss things that may have, been affecting us. And so with a therapist and through the discussion, we just reflect back to you, have a think about things, and that helps to be able to unpick the blind spot. So yes, there we go. I'm not very PowerPoint savvy. Yes. So as we heard from Gillie about the phases, it lays the foundation. So doing the psychoeducational work is part of recovery, but it's not all recovery. We need to go on and do the post-traumatic growth, emotional processing work, and that can be done with your PCC therapist, or you can choose and use your autonomy to say, that's great, I've done the workbook with you, but I'm going to go and find somebody that works in a different way and do therapy in a more traditional way to continue my journey of recovery. Many of my clients do stay on with me. I'm getting to the stage where we've done the workbook now and we are working out what to do next. And they say, I want to stay on and just think about some of the things that have come up for me in doing the work. And that's lovely because it's often about the relationship that you build with the client that enables them to have that openness, and I know their story, and we can continue to work together. And that's, for me, that's absolutely fine. I love to remain working longer term with my PCC clients and doing other pieces of work. So that's my part in just being able to feedback what a joy it is to work with PCC and how much I've benefited personally and professionally. And I'll be speaking a bit more about my own experience tomorrow in court too. You want to join me and hear a bit more about that?
That was wonderful, Claire. Thank you. It was really interesting. I like knowing the different ways that you and Jennifer are applying the things that you've learned directly from Gillie, and then also just going through the workbook. It's very impressive. And Jennifer is in Los Angeles, and Claire, you and Dr. Jenkinson are both in the United Kingdom. And we've been following along a little bit in the chat. Dr. Jenkinson's been able to answer quite a few questions that have come through. We did have someone ask, how do we find out information about the cost of Jennifer's workshop and signing up? So Jennifer, you're just on mute there. You're still muted. There we go.
Got me. Okay, sorry about that. You can. My website actually has a lot more information on the program itself and all of the details around that. And I tried to make this more affordable than the one-to-one counseling that I offer. So it ends up working out to be about sort of $65 an hour if you calculate kind of the live hours. But it's a major commitment. So for those interested, we'll be spending half a year together. So it's an important decision.
Very good. Thank you. And Claire, I think you mentioned faith to faithless, or do you want to give us any more information on how people can reach out and get a hold of you?
Yes, this is a part of Humanist UK, who are the very recognised charity in the UK. So Faith to Faithless is also charitable. And actually they met with government on Tuesday in the UK here, first meeting. So it's early stages, but they're looking to get some governmental recognition of the difficulties of leaving high control and also to get some funding. So they're a really good organisation to know about. There's a website that you can find them on. They are based here in the UK, obviously, but they run some fantastic support Zoom groups, and I am further aware anyone can join. And so, yeah, really, really recommend finding organisations like this. There's another one called the Family Survival Trust in the UK, which also works with people that have left cultic backgrounds or family members of people in high control currently. So they will support the family members. So we're very happy to share those resources because it's about getting the support in whatever way is most beneficial for you.
Excellent. And you'll be speaking to us later on in the conference about your personal and professional insights around the Jehovah's Witness group. So that's something I know that's going to be really important. We just have another minute or so left. I wonder, Dr. Jenkinson, did you have any additional thoughts you'd like to share, or resources or ways that people can connect with you?
Thank you. Yes, well, my website is hopevalleycounselling.com, as you can see on here. And as I get older and wiser, I hope, I started, obviously, you know now, training others and wanting to pass on, if anyone's interested, and they were, what I've learned. So I will be doing another certificate in post-cult counselling probably next year. The years seem to fly by. They concertinaed somehow, but it'll be next year or the year after. And I'm just reflecting on how to do that with having the new book come out and the old recovery workbook. So if you're interested, you can contact me through the Hope Valley Counselling website. And also, if you want therapy, I'm very busy, as are the others, but we have an affiliate page, as Claire said. So all the people who've done post-cult counselling are listed on the page. Some of them have spaces, some don't, but anyone who you like the look of, then contact them. They're all lovely. Look, you've met Claire and Jennifer, and the others are lovely as well. And they all have an experience of a relevant personal experience. They're not just people who thought they wanted to do it. They have that experience and they've been through that workshop. So, and then my book, and I so appreciate your endorsement and your kindness, Janice, and Walking Free from the Trauma of Coercive, Cultic and Spiritual Abuse, a workbook for recovery and growth. It was a very big job writing that. My dear husband did the editing, and it was a lot better for it. And check it out.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you to Jennifer and Claire as well. This has been a really interesting and informative session. I encourage everyone to get a copy of Dr. Jenkinson's book. It's very helpful. And we're coming to our break time. On deck, we have Dr. Ling Lam, and Dr. Lam will be talking with us about shame and complex trauma. So you're not going to want to miss that. Thanks, everyone.